That was just beautiful. I've shared with you in the past how a number of years ago, probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, Caroline and I made a very important decision, and that was to buy some chickens. And they were actually baby chicks. They were bantam chickens, which if you're familiar or unfamiliar with chickens, bantams grow to be about half the size of regular chickens. So we buy these. They're not sexed, and so we don't know if we have hens or roosters. We get them home, and as they get bigger, I have built a pen for them. And as they're getting bigger, it becomes clear that we have 4 hens and 2 roosters. And, of course, among the things that roosters do, they crow. And I had this little white one. He was my favorite. But that joker crowed all the time. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he would crow. 2 o'clock in the morning, he's crowing. And this joker is crowing all the time. And so after this has gone on for a little bit, Caroline and I had a conversation, and we said, you know what, we don't live out in the country. We don't live on a farm. We live in a neighborhood. It's probably going to be best so that we don't arouse any more ire of the neighbors. We need to find the chickens a new home. So there was a customer that I used to have when I worked at the bank. His name was Horace, and Horace had a farm, and I knew he bought and sold animals, and I called Horace, and I said, listen, Horace, I've got these bantam chickens, 6 of them. Would you like them? He said, it's funny that you'd ask that. He said, my granddaughters have been looking, or I've been looking for them, some small chickens. They live out in the country. They'd love to have them. And he said, so how much do you want for them? I said, they're yours for the taking. He said, yeah, I'd be glad to have them. So at that point, I go out to the backyard. I go to the chicken pen to catch the chickens. I don't know if you're aware of this, catching chickens, that's easy in the grocery store. And so I have to climb into this, and I'm trying to use a milk crate to catch them with. And so I'm in there on my knees, crawling on who knows what. Well, you know what. And so I'm in there crawling around trying to catch them. And in the process, a couple of them get out. And chickens can't like soar like an eagle, but they can fly a little bit. These could get, I'd say, probably 6 or 8 feet off the ground, enough so that you try to go grab one, they'll fly up and land on a fence post or something like that. So it took me probably a good 30, 45 minutes to be able to catch these chickens, but I got them and I put them in a diaper box, and I sealed it up, and I take them over to Horace's house. And so I get over to Horace's place, and I get the box of chickens out. And Horace opens the lid and he checks them out. And the first thing that he does is to grab them individually, and then he has some big scissors that he uses, and he clips their wings. Now, this doesn't hurt the chickens. Those of you that grew up on a farm, you're familiar with this. It's just cutting the end of the feathers off so that they can't fly at all. And so he does that, and individually, once he's done that, he puts them into the pen with the rest of his hens. And at this point, he's finished, and I'm watching these other hens check out my chickens that have now shown up. And it's funny to watch chickens check stuff out because they're like this. I just think it's hilarious to have to. Let me look at that a little more closely. Anyway, so these hens are checking out my chickens, and there was this one enormous hen that is checking out my favorite little rooster, the one that crowed all the time. And she comes over, and she's giving him the once or the twice over, whatever it was necessary to be able to check this rooster out. And apparently she didn't like what she saw, because as soon as she has investigated, she pecks him really hard on the back. And I thought, well, that wasn't nice. And then I was so thrilled because my little rooster, he was probably a third her size. He wasn't going to take any nonsense from a big old fat hen. He pecked her right back. And I was like, yes. I think he's going to be okay. I believe my chickens are going to be okay. And at that point, I felt pretty much at ease in leaving my chickens there with Horace and the rest of his hens. After that day, I don't know how many times, and even just recently, I had driven while in Charlotte past Horace's place, and I thought about those chickens. And as I would think about them, I would wonder if they're still around. And I wonder if they were delicious. No, but I wonder if they're still around. I wonder if they're doing okay. I wonder where they are. I wonder how they are. In truth, that's not that unusual a thought. It's pretty normal and natural, because anything that has any consequence or any measure of value to you, if it's not in your sight, if it's not in your presence, you wonder about it. And wondering about things doesn't feel so great. That's true not only in terms of material possessions, but it's especially true when it comes to people. Those that are dearest to you in life, whether your immediate family or the closest friends that you have on the earth. If they're not in your presence, if they have gone away or you haven't heard from them in a while, you begin to wonder about them. And sometimes you can get a bit concerned. I wonder where they are. I wonder how they are. I wonder if they're okay. I wonder if they're in any trouble. There's that level of concern, but then it gets even more amplified when death comes. Because when death comes, it really is troublesome to wonder of that family member, of that dear friend. I wonder where they are. I wonder if they're okay. And as concerned as we may be for those that we have lost up until this point, if we begin to think about it and evaluate that thought through the lens of our own personal experience, we are confronted with the fact, well, my life is going to end at some point, whether sooner or later. I wonder when that happens where I'll be. I wonder if I'll be okay. I've got some good news for you this morning, and that is very simply this. If you have a personal relationship with the Lord, and if the Lord is your shepherd, you don't have to worry about that question. You do not have to worry about that question because God is blessing and has blessed you in the face of the reality of death with amazing, unparalleled confidence. But it's confidence about what? Well, David reveals the answer to that question in verse 6 of the 23rd Psalm. If you would look with me there today as we finish this series through the 23rd Psalm, Psalm 23, verse 6. David very simply at the end of that verse says, "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." In just that one sentence, David communicates to us the great confidence that we as the children of God, as the sheep of God, that we're able to experience when it comes to the issues and the questions of death and of eternity. But what exactly is it that we can be confident of? Well, based on what he says, first of all, you can be confident of your eternal destination. You can be confident of your eternal destination. A number of weeks ago, we began working and walking our way through the 23rd Psalm in a series that I've called Counting Blessings. And even in the logo, you see the sheep because there is, throughout this psalm, this metaphor that David is employing and he is continuing to build on, trying to paint the picture of the relationship that, as a follower of God, you have with the Lord by describing it like and akin to that of a shepherd with his sheep. And throughout this psalm, he describes these blessings that we're able to experience and blessings that we're able to enjoy and that are afforded to us as those that are the sheep of God. Blessings that aren't given to everyone, rather they are reserved to those that have a personal relationship with the Lord. And by the time we get to the end of this psalm, we come really to the chiefest of blessings. And that is the confidence that we have when it comes to the questions of and the reality of death and of eternity. And as the message unfolds, we'll deal with some more of the specifics of what David says in this statement. But I at first want to deal with it in its totality, where he says, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And one of the things that we as individuals need, just as people need, is some measure of assurance, some measure of confidence when it comes to the questions of or the realities of the ending of our lives. And in this one statement, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever," there is absolutely a very noteworthy word that David employs. That's this little helping verb, will. David doesn't say, "I think I'm going to, I hope to, maybe if things work out." Rather, he says, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord and do so forever." Words like will convey these senses of absolute confidence. There is void within these terms any sense of uncertainty, any wondering, any doubt. He is speaking with confidence. Consider, for example, these two statements. "I hope to have lunch today," and "I will have lunch today." But those two statements are very different. Me saying that I hope to have lunch today is the expression of hope or the expression of desire. In effect saying, if things work out, and hopefully it will, I'll have lunch today. But saying, I hope to have lunch today, it's just as possible that I won't have anything to eat as much as it is that I will. It's a very different statement from me saying, I will have lunch today. I'm speaking then with absolute confidence. I'm saying regardless of what happens, I don't care how long you talk to me after this service is over. I don't care how many cars there are in traffic on the way from here to the house. I don't care what's going to happen. I am going to have lunch today. It is a statement not of probability, rather of certainty. It is confidence to the point that a future event is so certain it is inevitable, and I'm speaking of it just merely waiting for its fulfillment. David is expressing that type of confidence, but what is he expressing this type of confidence concerning? Well, that he is going to do two things. That he's going to dwell in the house of the Lord, and that he is going to do so forever. So he says that I will dwell in the house of the Lord. That's obviously a reference to heaven. So he says, I'm confident that I will be in heaven. So he's confident of the destination, but also the duration of it. He says, I will do this forever. If you were to start a conversation with the average Joe at work, at school, in the grocery store, in the shopping mall, just a random stranger, and you're to begin a conversation with them and begin to direct the conversation to more consequential things. Not talking about the weather or the Panthers, but talking about issues of ultimate importance. And begin with this type of question. When your life is over, what's going to happen to you? The average person that you ask that question of, they're going to say something like, I hope to go to heaven. Or they may speak with a measure of tepid confidence to say, I think I'm going to go to heaven. The great news and the wonderful blessing that we're able to experience is those that are part of God's fold. Those that have a personal relationship with the Lord are able to speak of issues of death and eternity with absolute confidence. We're able to say, as David said, I will dwell and I will do so in the house of the Lord, and I will do so forever. There's absolute confidence, no measure of uncertainty whatsoever, no mere hope. Rather, it's an expression of unparalleled confidence. But why does David experience this confidence? Why is he so sure and certain? Is it because David says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever because I say so? Is that what makes this for him a true statement, a certain reality for him? Is it because David says so? Well, not at all. Well, what breeds this certainty? Well, what brings this measure of confidence at the end of verse 6 is what he prefaces all of this with in verse 1, where he says, the Lord is my shepherd. How is it that David is able to say, when my life is over, whether that's sooner or whether that's later, I am going to dwell in the house of the Lord forever? I know that is certain. I know that will happen. Why? Because the Lord is my shepherd. What I'm trying to say to you is that this confidence arises not based on what David possesses himself. Rather, he has this confidence because it rests in the Lord himself. In Hebrews 10, verse 23, the writer of Hebrews tells us, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. The promise of heaven, the promise of eternal life hinges on the promise of God. His ability not merely to make a promise, but to fulfill a promise. And David is in effect saying, as surely as God is, and as surely as heaven is, I know that when my life is over, I will be with Him, and I will be that way forever. The U.S. economy is at this point absolutely not going gangbusters, but compared to where we've been since 2008, we've made a lot of progress. You remember back when the Great Recession began, you had the fall of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. You begin to have runs on banks like Wachovia, for example, as big as it was. They begin to get a run on cash, and in the process wind up getting bought out by Wells Fargo. The stock market tanks, the housing market tanks. There was record numbers of folks losing jobs and having the inability to find them. And so the economy was absolutely in the tank. And I remember at some point as we were working our way collectively to the bottom, Caroline and I were in bed one night and we were talking about all of this. And as we're talking about the state of the U.S. economy, she says, I really think that we probably ought to sell any stock that we have. We ought to take that money and then put it in the bank. And once it clears the bank, we should get cash for it and get some jars and dig some holes in the backyard and bury our money in the backyard. And she said this half in jest, but halfway seriously as well, because there was concern what's going to happen if all of this crumbles. Maybe you thought something similar. Well, I didn't think this was a good idea. I didn't want to get out of the stock market. I didn't want to start getting in the money burying business. And so I said to her, listen, every dime that we have in the bank is secured by the FDIC, which is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. If the economy absolutely fails and the banks all fail, then the government will fail, and we've got a lot worse problems to worry about. We can put this in there. We can keep it in there because of our confidence in who is securing it. The truth is that confidence about anything is only as good as what secures it. Likewise, your eternal confidence is only as strong by what, or in this case, who backs it up. David doesn't say, and you're not able to say, I'm going to dwell in the house of the Lord because I say so. Rather, you're able to say it with confidence because the Lord is your shepherd, and the shepherd has said, the shepherd has promised, if I go, I am going to prepare a place for you. And if I prepare a place for you, I will bring you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Listen, this is an amazing blessing, a tremendous comfort, an unparalleled blessing that we're able to experience as the sheep of God because we have this confidence of our eternal destination. But there's something else that David describes that we're confident of, which is this. You can be confident of your continued existence. You can be confident of your continued existence. All right, so David says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We noted that the little word will is important. It conveys certainty. Furthermore, in terms of grammatical structure, it's a helping verb. What do helping verbs do? Well, they help verbs. Verbs are the action words in any sentence. So helping verbs modify them. They help describe, in some ways, that action. So if will is the helping verb, what's the verb? Well, the verb is dwell. Will dwell. So will is modifying dwell. Dwell is a significant word here because it does mean to live or to remain and to abide in, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But at the very basic level, it is communicating the fact that I will continue to exist. That it is certain I will do this, and what I will do is to dwell. I will remain. I will experience life and living, and do so in the house of the Lord, in the presence of God. Caroline has a friend. His name is Adam, and Adam is Jewish, and he's not at all a committed, practicing Jew, more Jewish by ethnicity more than anything else. And they've been friends since high school. They went to Carolina together, and periodically they touch base with each other and just see how life is going. Sometime back, though, Caroline had spoken with him on the phone, and she describes the conversation with me. And she says that he tells her that his grandmother had died, and the family had gone to New York for the funeral process and all of that. And we've never been to a Jewish funeral or Jewish wedding or Jewish anything for that matter. And so she's asking him questions about this, and he describes it. And then she asked him this simple question: what is it that you believe happens, though, when a person dies? What is it that you teach or that you're taught? But more specifically, what is it that you believe happens when a person dies? What do you think has happened to your grandmother? And this was his response. He said, what I believe is that you have your life, your 70, 80, 90, your 100 years, however many years on earth it is that you have. And then when you die, you only continue to live inasmuch as you live in the memories of those that you leave behind. So you live on, but only in the memories of those that knew you and loved you. That to me is a phenomenally sad commentary, a phenomenally dreary prospect. That I have this life, however many years it is, and when my life ends, I only continue to exist in the memories of those that are left behind, and when they're gone, when their memories are gone, so too am I. You know, as sad as that thought is, as sad as that notion is, it is ultimately premised on this thought. My existence is contingent on my body. My existence is contingent on my body. And in essence, my body is my existence. Now, we talked about this a few weeks ago when David says of God that He restores my soul. And we talked about how the fact that your soul is the part of you that makes you you. It's not the part that can be seen or touched or heard or that can laugh or smile. That's your body. But that's not the part of you that makes you you. The part of you that is of consequence is what's on the inside. That's your soul. As those that are created in the image of God, we are spiritual beings, and we have within us a soul. In 1 Kings 17, we read the account of Elisha with the widow's son. And her son gets so sick that he actually dies. And if you remember this passage, Elisha goes and he lays down on the boy's body and 3 times prays this, O Lord my God, I pray, let this child's soul come back to him. He recognized that what gave this child existence was not the body, rather it was the soul. David understood that at some point in the future, whether it was a few months, a few days, a few years, or a few decades, his body was going to cease functioning. His heart was going to stop. His lungs were going to cease inhaling or bringing in oxygen. But when that happens, though the body may end, David was not going to end. He's saying, I'm going to continue. I am going to dwell. I am going to live. I know where I'm going to live, and I know with whom I'm going to live, and I'm going to do so forever. David was confident of, and any that have a relationship with the Lord can be confident of their eternal destination. They can be confident of their continued existence. But there's a final confidence that David mentions, which is this. You can be confident of your eternal company. You can be confident of your eternal company. David again says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The word that is used there that's translated as dwell in Hebrew is the word yeshab. It literally means to abide or to remain in. Not merely a kind of a temporary pass-through, not a layover, but this is where I'm going to be, and this is where I'm going to stay. Now, you have heard and said 1,000 times before, mentioning some place or having someone mention a particular destination. They would say, it's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there, right? And that thought is premised upon this reality, that there are places that are pleasant and have their positives, that has their negatives. It's fine to be there for a little while, but it's not a place you'd want to live, that you would want to remain. Because there's all the difference in being in a place for a week or two or a month or two than in being there from now on. And David does not say, I'm going to hang out for a little while. I'm going to have a layover. I'm going to park it here for a little while. Rather, he says, I am absolutely confident that I am going to remain where? In the house of the Lord. This is not a pass-through, not a layover, not a brief pause on the way to something bigger and better. This is where I am going to remain. But it seems that he is less concerned with the destination than he is about the company that he's going to keep. Because it's interesting that he continues to elaborate not so much on this destination, rather communicating the thought of who's going to be there. Notice he says, I'm going to dwell in the house of the Lord. So this conveys two thoughts. First of all, he's not just merely saying, I'm going to heaven. He's saying, I'm going to God's heaven. But it's God's heaven because that's where he is. For example, if I were to, and you were to have for me an invitation to my house, I'm not merely asking you to a geographic location where there's a plot of land that there is a deed to that has my name on it. I'm asking you to come to where I live. I'm asking you to come to where I am. I'm asking you to be with me. David knows where he's going, but he's also equally confident not only of where he's going, but with whom he's going to be experiencing that with. Paul speaks in his letter to the Corinthians and tells them that at this point we walk by faith and not by sight. And you've got to recognize that the relationship that any of you has with the Lord at this point is not based on the fact that you have physically seen God or that you've audibly heard His voice or physically touched His hand. You only experience Him through the eyes of and through the lens of faith. But Paul goes on to describe how one day we're not going to be walking by faith, we're going to be walking by sight. At some point in the future, all of those that are God's sheep will enter His eternal fold in heaven. And once there, you can leave belief at the door. You don't have to believe anything anymore because you can see God. You can see His face. You can touch His hand. You can audibly hear His voice. And about all of that, David says, I'm going to experience this. I'm going to be dwelling in, I'm going to be remaining in the house of the Lord, where He is with Him. Not walking by faith, but experiencing it by sight. And all of this I'm going to experience not for a season of time, not for a long while, but forever. Amazing, unparalleled confidence. David was, and any that have a relationship with the Lord can be confident of their eternal destination, confident of their continued existence, confident of their eternal company. Recently I read the story of a Shakespearean actor who many years ago was known for his one-man shows and in particular his dramatic recitals. And it had become his custom over the years at the end of an evening's performance to recite the 23rd Psalm. And so he would begin, as he concluded each night, saying with a dramatic booming voice, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And he would go through the psalm and conclude, as David does, by saying, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And it had become customary and quite frankly expected that every night as he concluded this, the crowd, upon hearing this, would respond with a standing ovation, with thunderous applause. So moved by his ability to take this psalm and bring its words to life. He'd been doing this for years. One night he was getting ready to go on stage, and before he did, there was this young man, kind of small and scrawny, that came up to him and said, "Sir, would you mind if I recited the 23rd Psalm tonight at the end of your performance?" The actor was a bit taken aback, but then he thought, it'll be something different. People, they're so accustomed to this. They've probably, many in this crowd have heard me do this 1,000 times before. Yeah, I'll tell you what, at the end, I will recognize you. You'll come up on stage and then you'll recite the 23rd Psalm. And quite frankly, I believe that he anticipated, well, they'll see how poorly he did it, and maybe he'll come back and follow him and show him how it's really done. So the actor does this performance that night, and it gets to the end, and when normally he would stand to recite the 23rd Psalm, he says, "Tonight we're going to do something a little bit different." And he said, there's a young man here that I've asked to come up on stage, and he's going to share with you tonight the 23rd Psalm. And so this young man gets up, fairly nervous, kind of sheepish voice, and he begins quietly, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters." And concludes, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." This night it was different. The crowds did not stand. Nobody applauded. The only sound, perhaps, was that of a chirping cricket. Stunned, deafening silence, except for the fact that it was said that there was hardly a dry eye in the auditorium. People were so moved. Once everybody leaves, and they leave in kind of a silent procession, the actor has a conversation with this young man, and he says, "I'm just amazed." He said, I don't quite get it." He said, "For years and years, I have been reciting the 23rd Psalm. I've got years of formal training and a near lifetime of experience doing this. And I have never been able to move a crowd like I've witnessed you do tonight. What is your secret?" And the young man, respectfully as he possibly could, says this to this actor, "Sir, you know the psalm. I know the shepherd." Amen. You know the psalm. I know the shepherd. Listen, there is, and it makes all the difference in the world, in this world and the next, when you know the shepherd. When you know him, you're able to experience and possess an unshakable confidence that when this life is over, you'll exist. You'll have life. You'll be in heaven, and you'll be with the Lord. That is, if you know the shepherd. Psalm 23 is so widely known, so amazingly familiar by those in the church and those outside the church. You've heard it perhaps dozens, maybe hundreds of times throughout the course of your life. My question very simply for you this morning is this: do you merely know the psalm, or do you also know the shepherd? Won't you bow your heads with me?